My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she's not qualified to be president. Let's start there. The fact is that
are you
consideration
kidding me? It's
is
the
that I think I'm the most qualified person. President.
Here comes President Biden after the NATO
let's
summit.
go.
Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point.
Just read the prompter, dumb. I don't know why he's trying to flex.
And to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know. The answer to all those questions is yes.
No, they don't. They don't care. Ask Americans, do they keep NATO or get free health care? You'll get a 100% win rating for health care.
America cannot retreat from the world.
Is this unscripted? What are you, crazy? No, he's reading a teleprompter.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision to
Of
stay in
course
the
it's
race is
rigged.
still
I told
open.
you all of this ahead of time.
George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she's not qualified to be president. Let's start there. The fact is that
are you
consideration
kidding me? It's
is
the
that I think I'm the most qualified person. President. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million. So things are moving. We got more to go.
He skipped
Working class
again.
people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down. And so I'm optimistic about where things are going.
I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up
so bad.
Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden.
Oh, my God.
Look, folks, this is, anyway. I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time.
Stop!
And find me a world leader who didn't think it was.
You mentioned there are instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge.
I didn't think it was going to be this bad.
What makes this moment in history so unique is that it is.
I thought he was going to do like just average.
Your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what you've worked decades to build? If you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. And under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way,
bro, he's resorting back to talking points. Like, he doesn't know how to answer questions, so he's just like riffing. They gave him talking points that he's like memorized that he's just saying.
Economists have said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. Doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit.
The question is asked too, though.
For example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase. Corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better.
This is the worst part about his rhetoric, because like he is actually pro-labor union compared to everyone else. And I hate that he is the worst vessel to carry on this message. He's literally tarnishing.
The best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there and import what the product was. And so I was told not to go over to Europe. To Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was,
bro, is he going to filibuster and then only end up answering 3 questions?
Sir, how can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
He's going to say, watch me.
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
That was the question.
Elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron.
Notice how every question is glaze-edged.
To have him as the president of the United States. But there is a concern.
Every question starts with a glaze-edge.
Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern.
It starts out with a glaze-edge, and then they ask a question.
Donald Trump
pre-prepared.
May weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. Can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. Be a disaster. I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. He
came for the copium, thought for a single second he might drop out. Why would I be sad about that?
And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin.
Yeah, because Putin hadn't invaded Ukraine yet and also failed.
And he was talking about
what?
We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera.
Stop hedging against Biden doing well. He's old as it's not like the most disastrous conference.
And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of
broadly
the West, particularly in Europe and Japan.
It's not good, but
to be able
nobody
to
was expecting it to be good.
Ability to produce their own weapon systems, not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need.
Do the reporters realize nobody cares about NATO news? Well, this is in the heels of a NATO 75-year anniversary. This is his favorite subject.
Deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in
He's talking about Xi, chat. Shut up. He's talking about chairman.
Leader I'm not prepared to
General
deal with.
Secretary, the GOAT.
But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won. And by the way,
I think there's really good reason to talk to Putin, for the record.
I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life. But they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there.
They said China doesn't supply weapons.
But what they do
China doesn't supply weapons directly,
are very
which is
good
true.
at controlling.
They do help, though.
Running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate.
They give
with
technology.
People. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target. And
I hate everything he's saying right now, but right now everyone is only hyper focusing on like the way he's saying it. So that's like the major point of contention right now. But I will address all of the ridiculous nonsense that he's chirping about in terms of foreign policy.
You spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war. And I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the
President of Mexico,
King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative. The Israeli war cabinet,
you think?
I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here come here all the time and heard me say this. First time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel.
He was alive when Israel wasn't.
This war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel in the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I've put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful.
That was a massive failure. Harder than the top of the hour ad break is.
Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing them 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage.
There's only one shipment.
Remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than
He's
most.
literally like, kill as many Palestinians as possible, but the day after, you can't occupy it permanently. That's
West
cool.
Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now.
Hamas is literally more popular than it ever has been as a direct consequence of Israel's incursion.
They are here.
I've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff and I said, I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand it. You know, the only thing age does is help you with it, creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is, I think it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out. Hadn't a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his.
He's slowed down so much since the beginning.
I laid it all out. And every single day, I'm surrounded by good docs.
One glaringly obvious difference is when he's answering questions versus when he was reading the teleprompter. I know that the media will point that difference out.
No one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam. I'll do it. But that's where I am.
You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I got overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Oh, I hate that.
I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least it was a red state when I started, in terms of we now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate.
It's the narrative that they always cast me aside.
You know, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them.
It's just too narcissistic.
They're going to run away.
Here's Secretary Blinken, Austin, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan when he said Vice President Trump.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
Look at his face. Bro, oh my God. Listen, Blinken and Lloyd Austin are used to it. They've had their share of those, like, what the moments because, you know, they're involved in Israel-Palestine. So they know to stay stone-faced. Look at Jake Sullivan at the end, though.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president.
Like, he just blinks. Lloyd Austin, military man right there. That's CIA's very own. He's like,
but I think she was not qualified to be president.
Dude, he's like, oh no.
I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Do you guys think that he's held captive and they're just like not showing him polls maybe? It's so Trumpian. Do you feel like this is like very Trump? You know how like they would draw crayon on his, they would give him like little crayons in the morning for his press briefing so he would pay attention, that type of shit, where they're basically just like not showing him polls. But he did say polls are bad and wrong early on. So I suspect that like he's just aware, he's just coping.
Earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference.
conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
That's bad. So a couple thoughts right off the jump. I said he was going to do average, like good enough. There were definitely some big flubs, but ultimately I think he did good enough. Ben Shapiro had this tweet where he said he started off rough and he's still having rough patches, but this is good enough to keep him in the race, which is terrible news for Democrats and excellent news for Trump. I don't think that that is enough for the Democrats to not come out with their statements, but it will cause enough of the holdouts to refrain from saying something. I still think that a lot of the Democrats are going to start popping off. Representative Jim Himes of D. Connecticut, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, asked Joe Biden to step aside. This is from 1 minute ago. Look at his reply. Maybe I spoke too soon. He's yelling and jabbering. The wisdom of doing this press conference at NATO is clear. Shaky on other stuff. The POTUS is very comfortable on national security issues. The last second whisper is bad. Obviously, he had really impactful moments within this presser that everyone is going to pay attention to. So he's anyway. He was before he did this presser, and he's still after this presser. But we're because he did not collapse entirely like he did at the debate. Why do I say this? It's because while the additional people from the Democratic Party that were slated to release their PR statements about how Biden should step aside are still going to come out and say it, because this is not instilling confidence in anybody. And to be fair, there was no way that he could patch something so glaringly obvious that so many people are now saying, which is that he's too old to perform, too old to function. But he got just enough rope. He got just enough, especially on the NATO which is his bread and butter, that this will give him the copium and all of his sycophants enough ammunition to say, oh, where are you now? Okay? Because he was, for long enough sequences throughout the filibuster, especially as it pertains to NATO, pretty coherent. There are a couple things that you have to pay attention to. I said 2 things to pay attention to with Biden's big boy presser. He's slowed down significantly over the course of the past hour. He has a time limit to how long he can perform. The difference in pace, tone, and coherence between reading the prompter in the beginning versus off-the-cuff answers is massive. You put that side by side, and people will still understand the exact same point. Now, also, obviously, Vice President Trump moment is going to be the most significant flub here that everyone is going to hyper-focus on. David Dayen had a good take on this. He said, Biden was asked what changed on him being a bridge to the next generation. He says, what changed was what he inherited. He spent his entire news conference saying that the economy's great, border crossings down, crime down, inflation down. Why isn't it a good time? Obviously, it's because he's selfish. Earlier today, Zelensky, Putin, he very quickly followed that up with, on the first answer to the question, his own Vice President Trump. That's not only just embarrassing, but that is exactly what people are going to focus on. Do you understand? It's the worst of both situations. Well, I guess the other situation would be that he just had a banger session, and then liberals would be on copium mode, and liberals would be like riding with Biden super hard. The holdouts, the dead enders, rather, would be extra aggro. What ended up happening is he gave them just enough ammunition to say, see, it was a one-off. So they'll get even crazier in the upcoming days as more and more Democrats come out and demand he step aside. After hearing this, what would you say the odds are that he's the Democratic candidate come November? I don't know, because I don't know how stupid the Democratic Party is. I don't know how cowardly the Democrats can be. News. Moments after President Biden concluded his news conference, House Intel top Democrat Jim Himes calls on Biden to step aside. He calls Biden a remarkable leader of unparalleled public service, but he no longer believes that Biden is the strongest candidate to beat Trump. I am too scarred from my experiences with the Democratic Party in 2016 to believe that they won't stay the course. It brings me no pleasure to report this to you, but I have seen the depravity and the feckless cowardice from the Democratic Party before. And guess what? That was Hillary Clinton. She was actually technically, polls were cucked or whatever, but she was still beating Donald Trump in the polls, at least. I don't know how unimaginably cucked the Democrats can get, so I can't give you a prediction that you want.